The meeting had been going on for 4 hours and nothing had been decided. This was normal. In the Galactic Conclave, nothing was ever decided in less than 4 hours. Nothing was ever truly decided at all. It was more that everyone argued until they were tired, and then someone wrote down whatever the least offensive position was, and everyone agreed to pretend that was the same thing as a decision. Velsereth sat in the third tier of the chamber and watched the arguing with the patience of a species that lived 300 years on average, and had learned, sometime around year 50, that most things resolved themselves if you simply waited long enough. The dispute today was about trade routes. Specifically, about which conclave member species had the right to tax cargo passing through the Kelvin corridor. The Dorith delegation believed it was them. The Mensal believed it was them. The other 38 species in the chamber believed it was deeply boring and wished everyone would stop. Velsereth was composing his notes on the argument so far when every screen in the chamber went white. Not dark, white. Filled with light, all at once. Every surface that could display anything, the trade dispute data, the overhead projection of the Kelvin corridor, the small personal screen on his desk where he had been writing, all of it, replaced by a single block of text, in every language. The conclave recognized. He read it the way he read everything, carefully, from left to right, without rushing. Emergency broadcast conclave, wide. Classification, navigational hazard, category, Omega. A human warship is closing in on Sector 7, Delta. All non-combatant vessels are advised to evacuate the contested zone immediately. Brace yourself. There will be no survivors. The chamber, which had been extremely loud 4 seconds ago, was now extremely quiet. Velsereth looked at the message for a long time. Then he looked around the room. 40-plus species, each with their own way of showing fear. The Dorith had gone very still, their neck frills pressed flat. The Mensal, who had 4 hands, had folded all of them. 3 members of the Leth delegation were already moving toward the exits in a way that was technically walking but looked a great deal like running with better posture. The trade dispute was, apparently, over. He looked back at the message. He read it again. He was particularly interested in the classification navigational hazard. The Conclave's emergency system was very old and very thorough and had a category for almost everything. Solar flares, debris fields, unstable wormholes, biological contamination events. A human warship had been placed in the same category as a solar flare. He was not sure how he felt about that. He was not sure the Conclave system knew how it felt about that either. It had chosen navigational hazard, the way a person grabs the nearest available object when they are falling, not because it is right, but because it is there. His superior, High Arbiter Fendos, appeared at his shoulder the way High Arbiters always appeared without warning, already talking. "You're going," Fendos said. "I was not aware I had volunteered. You're the most junior adjudicator present. The others are all extremely busy." Fendos looked at the chamber, where the other adjudicators were visibly trying to become invisible. Diplomatically busy. "You understand." Velsereth understood perfectly. "What am I going to do when I get there?" he asked. "Talk to them. Assess the situation. Recommend a course of action. And if the course of action they have already chosen is to engage a hostile force in direct military combat in a protected sector," Fendos was already walking away, "then you'll have a very interesting report to write." The shuttle they gave him was small and fast, which was exactly what you wanted when you were being sent to make contact with a human warship before it did whatever it had decided to do. Time, in situations like this, was not a generous resource. Velsereth used the transit time to read. The Conclave kept detailed records on every species. This was less about knowledge and more about survival. The galaxy was large and strange and full of things that could kill you, and the Conclave had learned, over centuries, that information was the only reliable armor. They had files on 200, plus civilizations. They had a very large file on humans. He had read parts of it before. Everyone in diplomatic service had. You read the human file the way you read about natural disasters, not because you expected to be in one, but because it seemed irresponsible not to know. Now he read it completely, start to finish, sitting in a shuttle seat that was slightly too small for his height, with a cup of something warm that had gone cold, watching stars smear past the viewport. The first recorded contact between the Conclave and a human warship was 32 years ago. A colony, a human colony, One of their outer settlements, small, maybe 8,000 people, was under attack by the Vorith, a species that had been in a slow territorial expansion for decades. The Conclave had been aware of the situation. The Conclave had been discussing it. The Conclave had been in the process of forming a subcommittee to explore potential diplomatic frameworks for addressing the ongoing destabilization of the Outer Rim territories. A human warship arrived without notice, without authorization, without filing any of the 17 forms the Conclave required for military movement through protected space. The Vorith fleet was 11 times the size of the human ship. The human ship transmitted a message. The same words, the same format, the same flat, unadorned delivery that had just gone out across the entire conclave chamber. Then it stopped responding to communication attempts entirely. Not jamming, not hostile silence. It simply had somewhere to be and was going there, and talking was not part of going there. The engagement lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Vorith fleet was gone. The human ship was still there, badly damaged, running on partial power, but present, holding its position above the colony. The Conclave sent an inquiry, formally, with appropriate language about unauthorized military action and treaty violations and the importance of observing established protocols. The response from Human Naval Command was 7 words. There was a colony. We showed up. No further explanation was given. No further explanation appeared to have been considered necessary by the people sending the message. Velsereth sat with that for a moment. He moved on to the second incident on record, then the third, then the 9th, and the 15th, and the 23rd. He noticed a pattern. The pattern was not what he had expected. He had expected if he was honest with himself, which he tried to be, because dishonesty with oneself was the beginning of very bad decisions. He had expected invincibility. Monsters from stories. Something that hit and did not bleed. That was not what the records showed. Every incident, every single one across 32 years of recorded contact showed human warships taking damage. Serious damage. Casualties that, for any other species, would have ended the engagement. Ships that should have been dead by any reasonable tactical calculation, still moving, still firing, still doing the thing they had come to do. They were not invincible. They were something much harder to defend against. They had decided the outcome before the battle started, and then they went and collected it, no matter what the collection cost. The 23rd incident was a short entry. A human warship had intercepted Conclave peacekeepers who were attempting to enforce a transit restriction. This was technically a serious violation. The commander of the human ship had complied with the stop order immediately, no argument, no aggression, and then sat in place for 6 hours, while the Conclave processed the authorization paperwork, because the paperwork was required and the peacekeepers needed it done correctly. During those 6 hours, the human crew offered the peacekeepers coffee. They had a coffee machine on the warship. They were apparently proud of it. The peacekeepers had accepted the coffee. Afterward, no one from either side seemed entirely sure what to file the incident under. The human ship, once cleared, had proceeded into the restricted zone and destroyed a slaving operation that the Conclave had been officially monitoring for 4 years. Then it docked for repairs and filed the appropriate post-action reports. The peacekeepers had filed a complaint. No one in the Conclave had been able to agree on what the complaint was actually about. Velsereth put the file down for a moment and looked at the stars. A species that waited in compliance for 6 hours and then went and did the thing it came to do, because the thing needed doing this, was not a species that acted out of anger or pride. Anger did not wait politely for paperwork. Pride did not accept coffee from the people blocking its path. He picked the file back up. The 41st incident, close to the present day, was 3 lines long. A human warship had received a distress beacon from a station near Mhendor. The warship had traveled to Mhendor in response. Upon arrival, whatever had triggered the distress beacon was no longer present. The warship had stayed for 12 hours. Then, it departed. Whatever had been at Mhendor did not return to that system for 11 years. It did not return to any adjacent system either. It simply stopped, in an area of space that it had been steadily moving through for 2 decades. The human ship had fired nothing. It had just arrived. That was enough. Velsereth closed the file. He sat very still for a long time, with the kind of stillness that was not peace, but was the thing you did instead of peace, when peace wasn't available. He was 300 years into a life spent watching species navigate each other, threats and counter-threats, posturing and leverage, the endless complex dance of power and fear. He knew what deterrence looked like. He had seen species build whole civilizations out of the logic of mutual destruction, of careful balance, of everybody knowing what would happen if they pushed too far. None of it looked like this. Deterrence said, "Attack me and you will suffer." Whatever the 41st incident represented said something different, something he did not have a clean word for in any of the 11 languages he spoke. "I am here. You know what I am. Now choose." The shuttle dropped out of faster-than-light travel. He looked up. The unconditional filled the viewport. He had seen human warships in photographs, in record footage, in three-dimensional model reconstructions, in the Conclave's tactical database. He had thought he understood the scale. He had not understood the scale. It was long, aggressively, almost recklessly long, designed in hard angles with no curve that was not functional, no surface that was not armored, a ship that had been built by people who had never once in the design process asked whether it looked intimidating, and had ended up with something that looked like the universe's answer to an argument. Running lights blinked along the hull in patterns that were technically navigation signals and also read, to Velsarith's eyes, like a pulse. Like the ship was alive and breathing and awake. One of the engines was dark. A full quarter of the port side showed scoring that had not been repaired, could not be, he thought, but had not been, because there had been no time, because the ship had come here directly from somewhere else, that had required everything it had. 3 hull sections near the midship showed patches that were a slightly different shade than the surrounding armor. Older repairs. The ship had been hurt before and fixed itself and kept going. It was heading somewhere worse than where it had been. He could see, at the front of the ship, where the armor was thickest layers of it, built up over the original design, clearly added later. Someone had looked at the front of this ship, at the part that would hit the fight first, and decided it needed to be harder, more protected, not because the crew was afraid, because the crew intended to put the front of their ship directly into the worst of whatever they were going toward, and they wanted to survive long enough to finish it. Velsarith realized his hands were pressed flat on the surface of his desk. He lifted them, looked at them, put them in his lap, where they would be less embarrassing. His comm lit up. The shuttle's pilot, who was a young Conclave navigation officer named Preth, and who had said approximately 12 words since departure, spoke for the first time in 2 hours. "They're hailing us, adjudicator. The unconditional. They know we're here." "Of course they do," Velsarith said. "Except the hail." A human voice came through. Flat. Efficient. Not hostile. "Conclave shuttle. This is UES unconditional. You're clear to dock at Bay 7. Someone will meet you. Watch your head on the corridor ceilings. The 7th bay has a low clearance on the left side. There's a sign. Most people ignore the sign. Just don't ignore the sign." The channel closed. Velsarith sat with the strange mundanity of that for a moment. "Watch your head. There's a sign." He had prepared for many possible first contact scenarios. He had not prepared for practical safety advice. The shuttle moved toward Bay 7. The unconditional grew larger and larger, and then it was all. There was no stars visible, just the ship, just the scored and patched and breathing hull of something that had been to terrible places and come back and was on its way to another one. He thought about the 7 words in that first record. There was a colony. We showed up. No other explanation given. None considered necessary. Velsarith thought. Perhaps the most frightening thing about humans was not their warships, or their casualty tolerance, or the way whatever lurked near Mendor had simply stopped and left when they arrived. The most frightening thing was that they seemed to think all of it was perfectly normal. They showed up. That was the whole of it. They showed up. And the universe rearranged itself around that fact, and they filed the paperwork and made coffee, and moved on to the next place that needed them. The shuttle docked. The magnetic clamps caught. The bay doors sealed behind them, and the sounds of the ship came through the hull. Not silence, but the opposite of silence. A deep, constant working hum of something very large that was fully committed to being exactly where it was. Velsarith straightened his diplomatic sash, checked his translator, stood up. He walked to the door. He stepped aboard the unconditional. He remembered, at the last second, to watch his head. The sign on the left side of the corridor ceiling was there. He did not ignore it. Somewhere ahead of him, past corridors that smelled like recycled air and old coffee, and the particular sharp metallic smell that was, he would learn later, the after-smell of a ship that had recently been in a serious fight somewhere past all of that. The commander of this ship was doing something. He was about to find out what. The hum of the unconditional was all around him. Steady. Patient. The sound of something that had been running for a long time and had no intention of stopping. He walked forward. The lieutenant who met him at the bay door was young, human, and had a bandage covering most of the left side of his face. He did not seem to notice the bandage, or perhaps he had noticed it so many times by now that it had simply stopped registering as something worth noticing. He held out a hand. Velsarith had read about this, the human greeting gesture, and Velsarith took it, and they shook once, which was exactly the right number of times according to what he had read. Adjudicator Velsarith, the lieutenant said. I'm Lieutenant Derakes. I'll take you wherever you need to go. I need to speak with your commander. She's aware. She said to bring you to the mess first. He was already moving, already expecting to be followed. You want water? We have some other things too. Depends on what your biology needs. Water is acceptable. They walked. The corridors of the unconditional were not what Velsarith had expected, and he was becoming aware that his expectations were a very poor guide to this ship. He had expected something stark, military to the point of severity, the inside of a weapon. What he got was a place that people lived. There were photographs attached to the wall beside one of the doorways, small, rectangular, printed on actual paper in the way humans sometimes still did. He could not see them clearly as they walked past, but he saw enough. Faces, groups of people, a beach somewhere, ocean and light, a child on someone's shoulders, laughing at something beyond the frame. Someone had put those photographs on the wall of a warship. Someone had looked at this corridor, in this vessel that went to the worst places in the galaxy, and traded fire with things bigger than itself, and thought, I want to be able to look at these when I walk past. He thought about that and kept walking. The mess hall was large enough to seat perhaps 100 people, and was currently occupied by maybe 30. They looked up when he entered, a natural reflex, he supposed, checking the entrance, and then most of them looked back at what they were doing. Eating, talking in the low, close way of people who had been in a confined space together for a long time and had gotten past the need to perform normality. A few were doing what looked like maintenance work on small equipment, taking things apart and reassembling them with the automatic ease of people who did this regularly. One human, sitting closest to the door, was asleep in a chair with his arms folded and his chin on his chest, breathing slowly. Completely unconscious in a room full of noise, Velsarith had read that humans needed significant amounts of sleep, and would, if prevented from sleeping, find places to sleep regardless of whether those places were appropriate. He had assumed this was an exaggeration. Lieutenant Kess set a container of water in front of him and sat down across the table. She won't be long. She's wrapping something up on the bridge. How long have you been on this ship? Velsarith asked. Kess thought about it. 3 years, give or take. And before this deployment? Training. 2 years on a patrol vessel. Nothing like this. He glanced around the mess. At the crew. At the sleeping man in the chair. Nothing like this, he said again. But the second time it meant something different than the first. Is it difficult? Kess looked at him. Young eyes, Velsarith thought. A very young face under the bandage. But the eyes had a quality that age had nothing to do with, something that had seen what it had seen, and was still here, still present, still getting up and going to the bay door to escort diplomatic visitors, because that was the job today. Some days, Kess said honestly. Most days it's just work. Maintenance. Watch rotations. A lot of waiting, and then a lot of not waiting very fast. He paused. The waiting is harder than the not waiting. That's what nobody tells you before you sign up. And the not waiting? You don't think about it, he said. You train so much that when it comes you're just doing the next thing, the thing after that. It's only after that you... He stopped. It's only after. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't seem to feel that he needed to. Velsarith drank his water. Across the mess, 2 humans were having an argument about something involving a card game and what appeared to be a considerable debt between them. The argument was loud and carried the particular energy of a disagreement that was also, very clearly, a form of friendship. The one who was losing the argument kept laughing even while he was losing it. Next to them, a woman with a mechanical brace on her right forearm, a support for an injury. Velsarith realized something that hadn't finished healing was writing something by hand in a small book. She wrote steadily, without pausing, the way someone writes when they have a great deal to say, and a limited amount of time to say it. Velsarith watched the room. He had, over his 300 years, sat in a great many rooms, in a great many places. He had sat in the halls of species that commanded vast interstellar empires, and species that had barely achieved stable orbit. He had sat in rooms full of politicians and generals and merchants and priests and scientists and criminals, sometimes several of these at once, which was always the most interesting combination. He had never sat in a room quite like this one. It was not remarkable on its surface. It was, in most visible ways, an ordinary group of people doing ordinary things in a confined space. Eating, sleeping, arguing about card debts, writing in books. What was not ordinary was the weight of them. It was something he could feel but not easily name, a quality the room had, a particular kind of gravity that had nothing to do with the ship's systems. These people had been somewhere terrible together. They were going somewhere terrible again, and they were sitting here in the meantime, eating and arguing and sleeping and writing, because you had to do something with the time between. And these were the things they had chosen to do with it. They were not pretending it was all fine. They were not performing bravery for his benefit. They were just here, fully here, carrying whatever they were carrying, and still showing up for dinner, he thought. This is what the files could not show. You could read the numbers, the casualty counts, the engagement records, the tactical outcomes, and you could understand human warships as a force, as a fact, as a variable in the Conclave's political calculations. But you could not understand them, not truly, without sitting in this room and watching a man sleep in a chair, because his body needed sleep, and the chair was there, and those facts were enough. Kes was watching him watch the room. First time on a human ship? First time. What were you expecting? Velsarith considered how honest to be. He decided honest was the right choice. Something less like this. Kes nodded slowly, as if this was a familiar answer. Most people think we're... He stopped. Started again. The signal. The one that goes out when we enter a contested zone. It sounds like a threat. It does, Velsarith agreed. It's not. Kes looked at his hands on the table. He had the hands of someone who worked with them, not a desk person, not a paperwork person, someone who repaired things and operated things and occasionally, Velsarith supposed, broke things that needed breaking. It's just what we say to ourselves. Before an engagement? Before everything. He looked up. We say it so that we know what we're there for, not to destroy something, to make sure nothing gets left behind. No mission, no person. His jaw tightened slightly, almost without his being aware of it. The bandage on his face did not move. There will be no survivors of this crew who have to live with leaving something unfinished. The mess hall hummed around them. The card game argument was intensifying. The woman with the arm brace finished writing something, read it back, and then closed the book and held it in both hands for a moment. The way you hold something that is important to you, before putting it in her pocket. How many people are on this ship? Velsarith asked. 1,100, give or take. Depends on the deployment. And how many did you lose? He paused. He had been going to say times in the last engagement. Something in the way Kes had been sitting made him reconsider the directness of that question. Recently, he said instead. How many recently? The answer that came was a number. Just a number. Kes said it in a flat voice and held eye contact when he said it, the way humans did, Velsarith had noticed, when they were being very deliberately steady about something. It was not a small number. I'm sorry, Velsarith said. He meant it. He had said the words many times in diplomatic contexts, as a form of social currency, a signal of appropriate feeling, a step in the ritual of these conversations. He had never quite meant them the specific way he meant them now. Kes looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite gratitude, and not quite anything else he could name either. They knew what the ship was, Kes said. Everybody on here, we all signed up knowing what this ship does. Where it goes. He shrugged, which Velsarith recognized as the human gesture of acknowledging something without having a better way to acknowledge it. They'd do it again. They'd all do it again. Would you? Kes didn't hesitate. He didn't even pause. Already planning to, he said. A crew member came through the mess, moving at the specific speed of someone who had a message to deliver and had been told not to run, and stopped at their table. She looked at Kes. "Commander's ready," she said. Kes stood. Velsarith stood. The crew member was already gone. They walked. Different corridors from the ones he had come through the ship had a logic to it that he was beginning to map. Everything organized around function, around the fastest way to get from the thing you needed to the thing you needed next. No wasted space. No decoration except the photographs, which kept appearing beside doorways. Small clusters of personal history pressed against the walls of a warship. He stopped at one. Kes stopped with him. The photographs at this section were different from the others he had seen. More of them, printed carefully, and placed in a deliberate arrangement, not random, not casual, but considered. In the center was a photograph of a group, perhaps 30 people, standing together somewhere he didn't recognize. They were not in uniform. They looked relaxed. Someone in the back was doing something with their hands that made several people in the front row laugh. He looked at the faces. Some of them, he thought, with a quiet certainty that settled in him like cold water, were not here anymore. "The memorial wall," Kes said, beside him. His voice was the same as it had been all along, not breaking, not theatrical, just his voice. "Every ship has one. Some are formal panels, engravings. Ours are photos, because the commander thinks you should be able to see their faces, not just their names." Velsarith looked at the photographs for another moment. Her idea? Yeah. Kes was quiet for a second. "After the first major engagement, we lost a lot of people. She went through the personnel records herself, pulled every picture she could find, had them printed, put them up herself, middle of the night, alone." He paused. "Somebody from the crew saw her doing it and tried to help. She told them no, said it was her job to do." Velsarith thought about the weight of that. 1,100 people on this ship. Every face on this wall a decision she had made, a plan she had given orders under, a mission she had chosen to accept. And in the middle of the night, alone, she had printed the photographs and put them up herself. Not because it was protocol, because she thought you should be able to see their faces. "She blames herself," Velsarith said. "Not a question. She'd say that's not the right word for it." Kes started walking again. "She'd say she holds herself responsible. That those are different things. Blame is about feeling bad. Responsibility is about doing better." They walked past more corridors, past more working crew, past a section where the wall was not quite sealed properly, and someone had placed a temporary cover over it and marked it with yellow tape that said, in large characters, "Being fixed. Please ignore," which was, Velsarith thought, a very human thing to write on a damaged warship. He was starting to understand something that the files had not been able to tell him. He had thought, reading the records, that what made human warships so difficult to account for was tactical, their methods, their casualty tolerance, their willingness to engage regardless of the odds. And those things were true, and they mattered. But the files had missed the ground under all of it. It was this. It was Kes and his bandaged face, and his times already planning to. It was photographs on walls, and a woman printing them alone at night. It was a man asleep in a mess hall chair because sleep was needed and the chair was there. It was times there was a colony time said with the full weight of 7 words and no others, because no others were required, because what else did you need to know? They were not a different kind of soldier. They were not built differently, not wired for violence in a way that switched off the rest. They were people who had decided something, who had, each of them, at some point in their individual histories, made a private and specific decision, and that decision had become the ground they stood on, and they stood on it with everything they had, and they kept standing on it even when it cost them, because the alternative was not standing on it. And that was something they had already considered and dismissed. The mess hall, the photographs, the sleeping man, the card game, the woman writing in her book. These were not things that existed despite what this crew did. They were the reason this crew could do it. Kes stopped outside a door at the end of a corridor that was slightly wider than the others, a detail that probably meant something functional and also registered, to Velsarith's instincts, as the approach to something important. "The mess," Kes said. "She's eating." Velsarith looked at him. "She eats when she can, between things." He said it without irony, without apology. You can wait outside or you can go in. Will she mind if I go in? She said either. She means either. He paused. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. That'll be the most useful thing I can tell you before you go in there. 2. He pushed the door open. Velsarith stepped through. The mess was different from the main one, smaller, plainer, a few tables, currently occupied by 2 crew members who were drinking something hot and talking in the low tones of people who were technically off duty and very glad about it. At the far table, alone with her back to the wall and a clear sightline to the door, which he noted was not an accident, that was a person who always knew where the door was. Commander Mara Osei was eating. She was eating flatbread with something orange on top of it. She had a cup beside her. She was reading something on a small screen propped against the cup, and she read the way she ate steadily, without wasted motion, taking in what she needed and moving on. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes found him immediately. Not the conclave adjudicator's sash, not the translator device at his collar, not the fact that he was a full head, taller than any human in the room, and a species she had probably not spent a great deal of time around. Him. She looked at him. He had been assessed by a great many people in a great many rooms. He had sat across from species that had 17 kinds of threat display, and species that could kill with a sound, and species that had been running galactic empires before humanity had discovered fire. He had been assessed by all of them. This was different. This was fast and complete and entirely without performance. She looked at him the way you look at something when you genuinely need to know what it is, not to impress it, not to dominate it, not to make a diplomatic gesture at it, just to understand it, as quickly as accurately as possible. She gestured at the chair across from her. He sat. She picked up her flatbread and took a bite and looked at him and waited. Velsarith, who had delivered hundreds of opening diplomatic addresses, who had spent 300 years learning the precise language of formal approach, opened his mouth and said, "Your lieutenant told me you put the photographs up yourself." She chewed, swallowed, set the flatbread down. For a moment something crossed her face that he would spend a long time afterward trying to describe accurately, and would eventually settle on this. It was the expression of someone who has, very briefly, been surprised to be seen. "Kes talks too much," she said. "He talks exactly enough," Velsarith said. "I've found that's rarer than it sounds." She looked at him for another moment. Then, with no change of expression and no change of posture, she picked up the flatbread again. "All right," she said. "So, what does the conclave want?" Velsarith told her what the conclave wanted. He had delivered versions of this speech before, carefully worded, appropriately formal, built from the specific diplomatic language that said important things, while also saying nothing that could be used against you later. He had spent years learning to speak in a way that all parties could hear as an agreement even when no agreement had been reached. It was, he had always thought, one of the more useful skills in his profession. Commander Osei listened to all of it without moving. She finished her flatbread while he talked. She did not look like she was not paying attention. She was paying complete attention. He could feel the quality of it, the focused and total absorption of someone who intends to use everything you give them. She just did not feel the need to perform being listened to while she was doing it. When he finished, she drank from her cup. "The conclave," she said, "wants the Mrath Combine sanctioned." "Correct. Not engaged militarily. The conclave's position is that further direct military action risks destabilizing the region. The Combine is already contained. Sanctions and restricted access to trade routes will, over time." "Over what time?" He paused. "Years," he said. The convoy they hit was carrying medical supplies, vaccines, equipment for 3 field hospitals that were supposed to be set up in the refugee settlements near the Varith border. She said this the way she had eaten the flatbread steadily, without waste. "Those settlements have been waiting 8 months already. They were waiting because the last 2 supply runs were delayed by conclave authorization paperwork." He did not say anything. "I've read the manifest," she said. "All of it. Every item on the convoy. Everything that's not going to get there now." She picked up her cup, set it down. "Over what time does the sanction address that?" He had no answer that was not embarrassing. "The Mrath Combine," she said, "has been taking slow bites at that sector for 2 years. Not fast enough to trigger a formal conclave response. Careful enough to stay inside the thresholds. They know exactly how the thresholds work because they've been in the conclave chamber watching how you set them. She wasn't angry. He kept expecting anger, and it kept not coming. They hit the convoy because they calculated correctly that the conclave response would be discussion. They're already calculating what they can take while the discussion is happening, which is why the conclave's position is to demonstrate that actions have consequences. I know what the conclave's position is, not cutting him off. More like she had seen the end of the sentence from far away and had simply arrived there first. I know it very well. I've had this conversation with conclave representatives 11 times in 6 years. We usually have it while something is burning. Velsarith held that for a moment. 11 times. The same conversation, the same positions, the same thing burning in the background. You're going to engage them, he said, regardless of my recommendation. She looked at him directly. Yes. Without conclave authorization. Correct. You're aware that this puts human naval vessels in violation of 3 separate sections of the Conclave Treaty. I'm aware of what sections they are. She folded her hands on the table. I'm also aware that the same treaty has a humanitarian intervention provision that has never once been successfully invoked in the 70 years since it was written, because the authorization process takes longer than most humanitarian emergencies last. He could not dispute this. It was factually accurate and also something he had personally raised in 3 separate internal conclave reviews, each of which had resulted in a subcommittee that had produced a report that had been filed and not acted on. Then I will ask you, he said, keeping his voice level, to at least tell me what you intend to do, so that the conclave is informed. She looked at him for a moment, reading something in him. He thought checking for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. The Mrath Combine has a battle group positioned at the edge of the Varith refugee corridor, she said. 15 ships, 3 carrier class, 6 mid-range destroyers, 6 smaller support craft. Their formation is set up to funnel any approaching force into a kill zone between the 2 main carriers. She pulled a small screen toward her and turned it so he could see. A tactical map, the kind that, in conclave hands, would be a classified document requiring 17 levels of sign-off. They have been in that formation for 9 days, which tells me they're waiting for something else to arrive. Something bigger. Once that something arrives, they move on the settlements. Quote, he looked at the map. He had no tactical training. He was a diplomat, not a soldier, but he could read a shape. Your approach vector, he said slowly. Straight through the center. That's directly into the kill zone. Yes. He stared at the screen, at the shape of it, at what the shape meant. You'll absorb fire from both carriers simultaneously. Yes, the casualties aboard this vessel will be significant. Not a hesitation, not a pause for effect, just the next fact in the sequence. Less significant than what happens to 11,000 people in those settlements if the Combine's reinforcements arrive. He looked up from the screen at her. She was watching him with that expression again, not blank, not cold. Something much harder than cold. Something that had looked at the math, and checked the math, and hated the math, and was going to do the math anyway. How many people are you willing to lose? He asked. It was not a diplomatic question. It was too direct for diplomacy, too raw. The kind of thing you asked when you had stopped performing the conversation and started actually having it. He expected her to object to the framing. He expected her to answer in the language of mission parameters and acceptable outcomes. She did not. As few as possible, she said. And more than I want to. The room was very quiet. At the other table, the 2 crew members had finished their drinks and left without him noticing. I've been doing this for 16 years, she said. Every time I've said that answer, I've meant it more than the time before. There's no number I'm comfortable with. There never will be. Anyone who has a comfortable number shouldn't be in command of anything. Anyone. She stood. He stood too. Not because he had meant to, but because she was standing, and the conversation had shifted into a register where sitting felt wrong. I want to show you something, she said. She walked quickly. He kept up. She didn't check to see if he was keeping up. She just walked, and he was either there or he wasn't, which somehow did not feel like rudeness. It felt like a person who was always moving toward something and simply assumed that anyone who needed to be with them would manage it. She took him to a room he had not seen, not the bridge, not the medical bay, not any of the corridors he and Kes had traveled. A room off a maintenance corridor, unlabeled on the outside. She pushed the door open. It was small. It had one table. On the table, stacked in careful piles, were printed sheets, reports, manifests, communications, some handwritten, some formatted. On the wall above the table was another arrangement of photographs, not the memorial wall photographs. These were different. He looked closer. Children, elderly, people in the specific posture of people who have been displaced, everything they own and what they are carrying, nowhere to stand that belongs to them. A cluster of images from the refugee settlements near the Varith border, and among them, woven through, photographs from after, settlements with roofs, people at tables with food, children who had some of the weight off their faces, before and after, again and again, not a small collection, a very large one. Every mission, she said, standing beside him, looking at the wall. I pull everything I can on the situation we're going into, not the tactical data, the human data, or whatever species data, the people, she said, times people times the way you say a word that means more to you than any synonym for it, because it's easy to stop knowing what you're there for. It's easy to know, in the abstract civilians, settlements, humanitarian corridor, and forget that times, civilians, times, means a specific child who is 9 years old and has never lived anywhere that didn't have soldiers in it. He looked at the photographs, at the specific child she might have meant, at the many possible candidates. You do this for every mission, everyone. And the after photographs. How do you get those? I ask, she said simply. When the mission's done, I contact whoever's on the ground, whatever aid organization is working the area, and I ask for after pictures. Most of them send them. She paused. Not all. Some places there aren't after pictures. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She stepped back from the wall. Those stay up, he thought. She has been carrying this for 16 years. Every mission, every before and every after, or absence of after. Every name on the memorial wall, and every photograph in this room, he thought. And she gets up every morning and she reads the next manifest and she files the next flight plan. He understood, then, with the specific clarity that came from standing in this room and looking at this wall. He understood why nothing in the conclave files had captured it correctly. The files described outcomes, numbers, tactical results. They measured the force that human warships applied to problems and found it extraordinary. They had never measured what the force was made of. What do you need from the conclave? He asked. She glanced at him, not expecting that question. He supposed she was used to conclave representatives asking for things, listing requirements, presenting conditions, not asking what she needed. Get your non-combatant vessels out of the sector, she said. Conclave registry ships, civilian, anything that's not military. I don't want anyone in the crossfire who doesn't have to be. I can arrange that. Medical resources after. Whatever the conclave has in range, we'll need them. She said times wheel times, and he heard both meanings. This ship, and the settlements. Whoever survived both sides of what was coming. Anything else? She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is not used to the question and is quickly figuring out whether to trust it. When it's done, she said. Whatever the conclave files about this when they write the report. The official account I need them to use. The right names. For the convoy, for the people on it. Not just times, humanitarian convoy times and a number. Their names. He had filed hundreds of official reports. He could not remember the last one that included individual names. I'll make sure of it, he said. She nodded. Once. The kind of nod that was a completion, not a thanks. Not a performance of gratitude. Just a confirmation that the matter was settled and they could both move forward. She moved toward the door. He followed. How long? He asked. 6 hours. Maybe less. She was already thinking past the conversation. He could feel it already on the bridge. Already running the calculations she had been running since before he arrived. You should get your shuttle clear. Bay 7, same as before. Kess will make sure you're docked and ready to move when I give the order. I'd like to stay, he said. She stopped, turned, looked at him with the same read you in 4 seconds assessment she'd used when he walked in. You want to watch. I want to understand, he said. There's a difference. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. The kind of expression that happened when a person encountered something unexpected that they found, against their anticipation, worth encountering. "There's an observation bay," she said. "I'll have someone take you." She walked out. He stood for one more moment in the small room, with its photographs, the before and the after, and the places where there was no after yet. And then he followed. In the corridor, 3 crew members fell into stride behind the commander without being summoned. She spoke to them as she walked. He could not hear all of it. He caught fragments, times, coordinates, a question asked and answered about something technical, her voice in the flat delivery of someone working through a task list in their head, while also working through a conversation. She was already somewhere else, he realized. The diplomatic part of the day was done. The next part had started. He thought about what Kess had said. The waiting is harder than the not waiting. He looked at her walking ahead of him, surrounded by her crew. The unconditional all around all of them, its hum, its weight, its 1,100 people, and its memory wall, and its room of photographs. And he thought, she is not waiting. She has never been waiting. She has been going toward this since before he landed. She had the conversation with him, answered his questions, shown him the photographs, made the agreements, and all of it had been real. All of it mattered, but underneath all of it, constant and unmovable, she had been going toward this, the thing ahead of them that needed to be done, the settlements, the manifest. The 9-year-old child who had never lived somewhere without soldiers. The conclave had sent him here to stop her. He walked behind her and thought about his report, about what he was going to write in the classification field, about whether the conclave's taxonomy had a word for a person who ran toward the thing that frightened everyone else, and did it not out of fearlessness, but out of something that had looked at fear and found it unconvincing, compared to the alternative. The ship hummed around him. 6 hours. Maybe less. He went to the observation bay. He sat down. He waited. The observation bay was a room of glass, or something that functioned as glass, a transparent surface spanning the full width of the bay, floor to ceiling, looking out at a field of stars that was completely ordinary and completely still, and had no idea what was coming. There was a chair bolted to the floor in the center of the room. Velsarith sat in it. He had been given a screen as well, a small tactical display, updated in real time, showing ship positions and movement data and numbers that he was learning to read, the way you learn a new language while someone is speaking it at you, fast and incomplete, and mostly by context. A crew member he had not met before came in once to check that he was still there. She had a sensor kit on her belt, and the distracted expression of someone who had 17 things to do, and this was number 14. But she stopped anyway, and looked at him directly. "You good?" she asked. "I believe so. Water? Food? Anything your species needs that we might have?" He thought about it. "I'm adequately supplied." She nodded. "If you want to leave at any point, the door's not locked. Someone will get you to your shuttle." She paused, with her hand on the doorframe. "Not quite going yet. First time watching one of these?" "Yes." She chewed the inside of her cheek for a moment. "It's loud," she said. "Even in here. Through the hull. You feel it more than you hear it." She looked at the transparent wall and the stars beyond it. "Just so you know. So it doesn't." She stopped. "So you're prepared." "Thank you," he said. She left. He sat with the stars for 2 hours. And then the unconditional moved. He felt it before he saw anything. She had been right, the crew member with the sensor kit. You felt it in your chest, in your teeth. A deep vibration that was the ship's engines opening up past the level they had been running at since he arrived. A change in the quality of the hum, like something breathing harder. Then the stars moved. Or the ship moved and the stars stayed still. The viewport shifted, and out there in the dark, at a distance that was very far away and also, on a tactical scale, not far at all, something lit up. Weapons fire. Not at the unconditional. Not yet. He was seeing the Marath Combine battle group, and they were repositioning. And the positioning was what Commander Osi had described in the mess. The funnel. The 2 carriers setting up on either side with the destroyers fanning behind them. A formation designed to catch something, coming through the middle. On his tactical screen, the numbers shifted. Positions updated. The unconditional's marker moved on the display. Straight toward the center. He had read the historical records. He had understood, intellectually, what that meant. He had sat in the mess, and thought about what kind of people sent a ship straight into a kill zone. Watching it happen was different from understanding it. The unconditional went straight in. Full engines. Not a flanking approach, not a misdirection, not anything that suggested they were anything other than exactly what they were. A warship that had decided where it was going, and was going there. The first impacts came before he saw the weapons fire that caused them. The ship rang not like a bell. Nothing that clean, more like the specific sound a very large structure makes when something very large hits it, a sound you feel in the base of your spine. The lights in the observation bay flickered, steadied. On the tactical screen, the unconditional's forward sections taking fire from both carriers at once, exactly as planned, exactly as predicted, and the unconditional, still moving. Still moving. He watched the velocity indicator. It did not decrease. The ship was being hit and it was speeding up. He pressed his hands flat against his knees, deliberately, and made himself keep watching. On the bridge of the unconditional, Commander Mara Ose stood at her station and ran the next 60 seconds ahead in her head. The forward shields were taking the worst of it. Not failing holding, for now, but there was a threshold and she knew where it was, and they were approaching it the way you approach a door in a burning building. Fast, before you had time to fully consider what was on the other side. "Target the port carrier's engine array," she said. Her voice was the same as it always was. Her crew needed her voice to be the same as it always was. Full spread, sequential, don't wait for confirmation of first hit before firing second. That's going to pull their fire from the destroyer line. That's the point. When they redirect to defensive, the destroyers lose their coordination window. We have about 40 seconds before they regroup. She checked the display. 40 seconds was not a lot. It was enough. Gunnery. When the destroyers break formation, I want everything we have on the lead ship. Everything. Once it goes, the others reassess. That's our window. Confirmations came back. Her crew did not question the orders. Not because they had been taught not to question, but because they had been through enough of these that they knew the difference between an order that needed questioning and an order that needed executing immediately. They knew. She had spent 3 years making sure they knew. The ship rang again. Something gave on the lower decks. She heard it in the sound. In the change of resonance. The shift that told an experienced commander that a section had just become much harder to be in. She checked the damage report on her screen. The number that came back. She held it, contained it, put it in the specific internal place where she kept things that she would process when there was time. "Damage control to Section 12, she said. Her voice did not change. "Copy. Gunnery. On my mark." The port carrier's engine array was bright on the targeting display. It was a specific weakness. She had reviewed the Combine's carrier class spec 17 times in the past 4 days. Looking for the place. Always looking for the place. And this was the place. Old ships, older design, an update to the engine shielding that the Combine had approved 3 years ago and had not yet implemented on this class, because new shielding was expensive, and they had calculated it wasn't worth it. They had calculated wrong. Mark. The unconditional fired. Everything it had. Sequentially. At the exact spot she had been looking at for 4 days. The port carrier's engine array lit up like a second star. Velsarith, in the observation bay, saw it happen. He saw the Combine formation change, not instantly, not all at once, but the disruption moving through it like a wave moving through water. Each ship reacting to what the ship beside it was doing, pulling their fire to cover the damage. The choreography of the kill zone breaking apart at the moment it had been most committed to working. The unconditional moved through the gap. He could not look away. He had seen, in his 300 years, many things that had impressed him. Great architecture, great speeches, species that had built things worth building and done things worth doing. He had a long catalog of remarkable things, filed carefully in memory, available for recall. This was not like any of them. This was not impressive the way impressive things were impressive. This was something that bypassed the part of him that processed impressive and went somewhere deeper, somewhere older, somewhere the 300 years of careful diplomatic training had not reached. He was watching something that had decided to be unstoppable, not because it was indestructible. He could see on his tactical screen that it was very much destructible, that it had taken serious damage, that sections of it were no longer functioning, that the casualty numbers he could see updating in the corner of the display were real and significant, and meant real people, in real corridors he had walked through. It was not unstoppable because nothing could stop it. It was unstoppable because it had decided to be. And everything that came at it, fire, damage, the accumulated force of 15 enemy ships organized specifically to kill it, kept running into that decision and finding it immovable. He thought about the 41st incident, the 3 lines in the archive, the thing near Mendor that had simply stopped and left. He thought he understood it now. It was not the weapons. It was not the firepower or the tactical capability. Those things were real, and they mattered, but they were not the reason. The reason was this. The unconditional had decided before it arrived. Whatever was going to happen, whatever it was going to cost, whatever it found when it got there, the outcome had been decided. Not in a way that meant it could not be killed or damaged or stopped by sufficient force. In a way that meant every calculation the Combine made about when it would stop was wrong, because they were calculating based on thresholds, and the unconditional had removed its thresholds. The lead Combine destroyer broke apart. The others scattered. Not in the organized tactical retreat of a unit following a withdrawal plan. Scattered, the way things scatter when the underlying assumption of a situation turns out to be wrong, when you built your battle plan on a world that turned out not to exist. The world they had built on was, every ship stops when it hurts enough. The unconditional did not stop. The Combine battle group came apart in sections. Some ships fired until they couldn't. Some turned and ran, not a strategy, not a fallback position, just flight. Just the decision that there was somewhere else to be that was not here, and they were going to be there. One of the carriers, the one whose engine array was damaged, was still fighting, reduced but present. The unconditional turned toward it. He watched the velocity. It did not decrease. The second carrier lasted 4 minutes. When it was done, when the space ahead of the viewport had gone from full of fire to full of wreckage and silence, Velsarith sat very still in his bolted chair and looked at what was left. The Combine ships that had run far. They were not coming back. He could see on his tactical display that the space between the unconditional and the refugee settlements was now clear. No battle group. No waiting formation. Nothing between the settlements and resupply except open space. The unconditional was damaged, badly damaged. One engine was fully dark. He could see it where the running lights should have been. Nothing. 2 sections of the hull were venting something. Repair drones were already moving along the outer surface, small insect-like things swarming toward the worst of the damage, because the crew had apparently planned for this too, had been ready to begin repairs the moment the shooting stopped. Because the shooting stopping was not the end. The shooting stopping was just the moment when a different kind of work could begin. He let out a breath he had been holding for he did not know how long. His translator device had been running a passive audio feed from the bridge. He had kept it low, background noise, not wanting to intrude. Now, in the quiet, he could hear it. A voice reading numbers. Calm, steady. Numbers from Section 12. Then silence. Then Osei's voice. Names. He could not hear what came back, could not hear the names from where he sat, but he heard her say, "I've got them." That was all. Then she said the next thing. Something about repair priorities, about the drive status, about ETA for medical ships to the settlements. Back to the task list. Back to the next thing after the next thing. The ship began moving again, different heading now, toward the settlements, to confirm the route was clear. To make sure what had just been done had actually done what it needed to do. The observation bay was very quiet. Stars outside. Wreckage out there in the dark. Already beginning the slow drift that wreckage did, becoming part of the space it floated in. He sat for a long time. He was trying to do what she did. Contain the thing in the internal place. Hold it for later. Keep the part of him that was supposed to function functioning. He was not sure he was doing it well. He was not sure, watching her do it, that anyone ever truly learned to do it well. He thought perhaps the difference between him and Osei was not that she had learned to do it better. The difference was that she had found a way to make the containing worth it. The photographs, the manifests, the before and after. The 9-year-old child who had never lived somewhere without soldiers. Maybe there were after photographs now. Maybe there would be. He thought about that. He thought about what it would look like. The settlement with the roofs. The people at tables with food. Something lighter in the faces. Maybe. He stood up. His legs were slightly unreliable under him. He took a moment, and then they steadied. He went to find the commander. He needed to tell her something. He had told her, earlier, that he would make sure the report used the right names. The names from the convoy manifest. He had meant it then. He meant it more now. But that was not the thing he needed to say. He walked through corridors that were different now than they had been before. More crew in them, moving faster. The specific organized urgency of people in the aftermath of something serious. Everyone knowing what their job was and going to it. No wasted motion, no panic. Someone was fixing a damaged panel in the corridor near the medical bay. She had it partially open, her whole arm inside the wall, working by feel. Her face turned away from the panel because the space was too tight to turn toward it. She was humming something to herself while she worked, under her breath, automatic. He did not know the song. He thought maybe no one outside the ship would know it. He thought maybe it was something that belonged in here, something that had been made in this space by these people, and it had not yet gone anywhere else. He kept walking. He found the commander on the bridge. She was at her station, standing, looking at the repair status display. Around her, the bridge was fully operational damaged, working at reduced capacity in a few places, but running. Her crew was running it. She heard him come in and turned without looking surprised. Adjudicator. Commander. He looked at her. She looked the way a person looks after 4 hours of sustained crisis, not broken, not barely standing, but used. Genuinely used up in the way of something that had given everything it had, and was still here, still upright, still making the next decision. The settlements, he said. Corridor is clear. Supply ships can move in. She looked back at her display. I've already sent the coordinates and the all clear to whatever conclave vessels are in range. Good. He stood beside her and looked at the display too. Not because he could read all of it, but because it felt like the right place to stand. You should know, he said, that what you did today, the conclave will write a formal objection. Unauthorized military action in a protected sector. It will be quite official. Town. She said nothing. I'll be writing my own report, he said, separately, with different emphasis. A conclave adjudicator's field assessment carries a specific weight in terms of how official objections are processed. He paused. It will take some time. There will be hearings. But I believe that the authorization framework can be amended. The humanitarian intervention provision. I've written about it before and nothing came of it. This time something will come of it. She looked at him. I can't promise the timeline, he said. No one can, she said. But something will change. I'll make sure of it. She held his gaze for a moment. The names, she said. In the report. Every one of them, he said. I've already started. She nodded. That same nod, the completion. The matter settled. Then she looked back at her display, and he stood beside her, and the unconditional moved through the cleared corridor, toward the place where 11,000 people were waiting, and the stars outside the viewports were ordinary and still, and had no idea what had just happened in the space around them. Velsereth looked at the stars. He thought, tomorrow, the conclave would receive his preliminary report. They would read the part about treaty violations. There would be, as he said, formal objections. There would be hearings. They would not read until his full report arrived, weeks later, with everything he had about the mess hall, about the photographs, about the woman who printed them alone at night and put them on the wall because you should be able to see their faces. They would not read about the bandaged lieutenant who was already planning to do it again, about the woman writing in the book with the broken arm, about the sleeping man in the chair. They would read numbers, tactical outcomes, the terms of the violation. He was going to change what they read. He was going to make them understand. He was not entirely sure the language existed yet for what he wanted them to understand. He had 11 languages, and he was not sure any of them had the word. He was going to have to build it from the available parts. He thought he could do it. He had 300 years of practice. The medical ships arrived 12 hours later. 3 of them conclave registry vessels, large, white-marked in the way of ships that were announcing they were not a threat, before anyone had the chance to assume otherwise. They came in slowly, which was not how conclave ships moved near a warship that had just finished a major engagement, but which was how you moved when you wanted everyone in the area to see exactly what you were doing and have no reason to be afraid of it. Velsereth was standing in the unconditional secondary communications bay when the lead medical ship made contact. He was there because the communications officer, a young man named Patel, who had 3 screens running simultaneously, and the specific focus of someone who had been awake too long and had decided not to notice, had asked him to help translate a request from the settlements. The settlement coordinator was using a dialect that the unconditionals translation software kept producing strange results on, and Velsarith spoke it. He helped translate. The settlement coordinator needed 12 specific things, in a very specific order, and she communicated these with the brisk certainty of someone who had been managing a crisis for months and had no patience left for anything except the next problem that needed solving. Velsarith relayed each item. Patel recorded them and forwarded them to the incoming ships. It took 20 minutes and was, as far as he was concerned, some of the most useful work he had done in years. When it was done, Patel looked at him sideways. "You're good at that. It's what I do," Velsarith said. "We could use someone like you on board permanently." He said it in the offhand way of a tired person, half joking, and then he seemed to realize what he had said, and looked slightly surprised by himself. "I mean, I understood what you meant," Velsarith said. He was surprised to find that some part of him was considering it. He went to find Commander Oze. She was in the small room, the one with the photographs. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. She was sitting at the table with a cup of something and a personal screen and the photographs all around her, and she was writing something, not on the screen by hand, on paper, in the same way the woman in the mess had been writing in her book. He waited until she reached the end of a sentence. She looked up. "Medical ships are here," he said. "I know. Wynn's handling the coordination." She set the pen down. "Sit." He sat. She moved the screen to the side so there was more of the table between them, which he had learned was her version of setting aside work. The task did not stop existing, but she was creating space, to not be in it, for a moment. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Letters," she said. He looked at the paper. Not one letter. A stack of them. To who? Families. She said it the same way. She said everything, not performing, not shrinking from it, just the word that fit the thing. "When we lose people, I write to their families. What they were like. Something specific, not just what it says in the service record, but something I actually knew about them. Something true." He looked at the stack. "You do this yourself. They deserve something that came from a person who knew them, not a form letter." She picked up the cup. "Takes time. It should take time. How long has it been since you slept?" She thought about it genuinely, as if sleep were an interesting historical event she was trying to place on a timeline, before the engagement. So, she checked something in her head. 31 hours roughly. "You should sleep. When the letters are done." He looked at the stack again. There were many letters. "Then I'll leave you to it," he said. He started to stand. "Wait." She looked at her cup. "I'm going to ask you something and you can tell me if it's not your place." "Ask." "The conclave," she said. "After this, the official position. Will they go after the settlements? The humanitarian work. Try to pull resources out, make it harder, as a way of..." She paused, chose the word carefully. "Expressing their position about what happened today." He thought about it. "Honestly, some of them will try," he said. "There are members who will want consequences to be visible, who will want to be seen enforcing the treaty. And there are others who know what those settlements represent, and who know that the images from this region, before the engagement, after the engagement, are going to be in the public record, and that certain political positions become very difficult to hold when photographs exist." He looked at the wall behind her, the before and the after. Certain things become very difficult to oppose out loud when the alternative is visible. She absorbed this. So politics. Everything eventually is politics. But politics can be navigated. That's what I do. He met her eyes. "The settlements will be protected. I'm going to make that the first item in my report. Not the treaty violation, not the engagement. The settlements, the conditions, what was at stake. If I frame correctly, the conclave's first public statement will be about the humanitarian situation, not about you. After that, it becomes very hard to walk back." She was quiet for a moment. "You're good at this," she said. "It's what I do," he said. The same thing he had said to Patel, but meaning something slightly different, meaning, This is the fight I know how to run. You have yours. I have mine. She looked at him for a long moment with the assessment expression, reading him the same way she had read him in the mess the first time, checking for the thing she needed to know. She seemed to find it. Get some sleep, she said. We've got rooms that accommodate non-human sleeping preferences. Not many, but Kes can find you one. After I've sent my preliminary report. After that, she agreed. She picked up her pen. He stood, looked at the photographs one more time. Commander, he said, I want to ask you something also. She looked up. The signal, he said. The original transmission. The one your ship sends when entering a contested zone. There will be no survivors. He had been carrying this question since the archive. Since the shuttle. Since the moment the words appeared on every screen in the conclave chamber. Where did it come from? She set the pen down. She looked at the wall. At the photographs. First deployment, she said. Long time ago. Different ship. Same idea. Her voice was the same flat delivery, but something underneath it had changed, register slightly. Something older surfacing. We were going into something bad. Everyone knew how bad. There was a moment before we left, on the flight deck, where someone said something. I don't even remember exactly who. Just one of the crew said, there will be no survivors of this crew who don't come home knowing they gave everything they had. She stopped, started again. It got shortened, the way things do, down to the last 5 words. Passed on, ship to ship. She looked back at him. The conclave heard it going out and thought it was about the enemy. We never corrected them. Why not? She picked up the pen. Because it didn't matter what they thought it meant. It only matters what we know it means. She looked at the paper. At the stack of letters. We all survive, or the mission does. Either way, no survivors, he said slowly. Left behind. Either way, she said. Nothing gets left behind. Not the mission. Not each other. She met his eyes. Not the people we went there for. He stood in the doorway of the small room with its photographs and its stack of letters and the woman writing them, one by one, in the middle of the night. Because they deserved something true, he thought. I have 11 languages. None of them had the word. He was going to build it. He sent his preliminary report from the communications bay, with Patel's distracted assistance. At 2 hours past, what he had now learned was the ship's nominal night cycle. The report was 3 pages, unusually short for a conclave diplomatic assessment. The first page was entirely about the settlements, the conditions, what had been at stake, who had been there, and what they had needed, and what they had been going to lose. The second page was the engagement, factual, spare, what happened and in what order. The third page was 1 paragraph. He had written it 8 times, and each of the first 7 times he had deleted it and started again. And the 8th time, he stopped deleting and filed it. It said, the Conclave's classification system for the human military presents, on review, a fundamental error. We have categorized them as a threat and spent 32 years writing frameworks for their management. This framing is operationally wrong. The unconditional is not a threat to the Conclave or its member species. It is a question. The question it asks, each time it enters a contested zone, is this. If you know something is happening and you have the means to stop it, what does it say about you if you don't? The Conclave has spent 32 years being unable to answer this question to anyone's satisfaction, including its own. I recommend we stop trying to manage the question and start trying to answer it. Full assessment to follow. He read it once, filed it. Patel, who had been politely pretending not to read over his shoulder, said nothing. Velsarith found the room Kes had set up for him. It was small, and the bed was the wrong shape for his build, but he had slept in worse places and on shorter notice. He lay down. He did not sleep immediately. He thought about the moment the signal had hit the conclave chamber. Every screen going white, 40 species holding their breath. The Leth delegation walking very fast toward the exits. He thought about what the galaxy had spent 32 years being afraid of. He thought about what it actually was. A ship that sent the same signal every time it entered a contested zone. Because the signal was a promise the crew made to themselves and each other and the people they were going to. And they sent it every time, because the promise was made every time and they did not assume the last time counted. They made it again. Every time. The sound of the unconditional surrounded him, the hum, deep and constant and present. The sound of something that was always on its way somewhere. that was never, fully, at rest. He fell asleep to it. In the morning, High Arbiter Fendos sent a message that contained 11 points of formal concern about the preliminary report and requested he call immediately. He read the message, put his screen down, drank the water that someone he suspected Kess had left outside his door at some point in the night, picked the screen back up. He called. Fendos looked at him from the screen with the expression of a person who had not slept either, but for different reasons. "Your report," Fendos said. "Yes." "The first page. The humanitarian situation." "Yes." "You've already sent it to the public conclave register. There was an accusation in this. A significant one. Reports went to internal review first. Everyone knew this. It was visible to member species at 0300 this morning. I was aware of what I was filing," Vilsarith said. 3 member species have already issued public statements supporting the humanitarian relief effort in the settlements." Fendos's expression was complicated. He was angry. He was also not unaware of what had happened. "You maneuvered the conclave into a public position. I filed an accurate report in a timely manner." Vilsarith. "The settlements," he said. "Are they protected?" Fendos looked at him. "Are they?" Vilsarith said. A long pause. "Supply convoys are authorized. 3 member species have committed medical resources." Fendos looked off-screen for a moment. "There will be no interference with the humanitarian corridor." Then my report did its job. Outside the window of the small room, a small window. Just a strip of transparent material low on the wall, the stars were visible. The unconditional was moving again. He could feel it in the quality of the hum. New heading. New flight plan filed, he supposed. New authorization paperwork, probably already in process at 17 conclave offices simultaneously. Somewhere, a convoy was getting through. Somewhere, a settlement coordinator, with no patience left for anything except the next problem, was receiving the 12 things she had asked for, in the right order. "The human warship," Fendos said. "What do we do about it?" Vilsarith thought about the letters, the photographs, the bandaged lieutenant who was already planning to do it again, the woman asleep in the mess with her book in her pocket, the coffee machine. "I'll send you something," he said. "Read the full report when it comes. All of it. Especially the last section." "What's in the last section?" He thought about the question. About the 11 languages. About the word he did not have yet but was going to build, from the available parts. "An answer," he said, "to a question we should have been asking for 32 years. He ended the call. He sat with the hum of the ship for a moment. This vessel that had been to terrible places and would go to more of them, that had 1,100 people in it, making promises to each other every time they moved. That had a room full of photographs and a wall full of faces, and a commander who wrote letters alone in the night because it should take time, and they deserved something true." He picked up his screen, opened a new document. He began writing. Outside, in the space around the unconditional, the stars were ordinary, still, quiet. They had no idea they never did what moved through them. What small, scarred, humming thing was closing in on whatever needed closing in on next. The galaxy did not know what to call it. He was going to give it a name. He wrote for a long time. He did not stop until he had it right. The last line of his report, the full report, the final version, the one that would go into the conclave's permanent record and be read by every diplomatic service trainee for the next 200 years. The last line said, "Do not be afraid of them. Be what they are protecting, and be worth it."